All right, well, let's go ahead and get started this evening. Good evening and welcome to everyone. Thanks for tuning in. Tonight we're featuring Porter Fox, a critically acclaimed author who's going to share stories from writing and researching his new book, The Last Winter, The Scientists, Adventurers, Journeymen, and Mavericks Trying to Save the World. With at least a foot of fresh snow on the ground in most parts of Maine, winter is certainly on all of our minds. So thanks for zooming in with us here tonight. We're thrilled to host Porter this evening for a discussion of his new book and to hear some stories from his travels and his research while writing The Last Winter. NRCM has hosted 2 events with Porter in the past for his 2 previous books. Deep, The Story of Skiing and the Future of Snow. We hosted an event at the University of Southern Maine in Portland, probably back in 2014 or 2015. And then we also hosted an event at Rising Tide Brewery in Portland in 2017, 2018, for his book Northland, about Maine, North America's forgotten border with Canada. Just to introduce myself, my name is Todd Martin. I'm the Grassroots Outreach Coordinator here at the Natural Resources Council of Maine. NRCM is a nonprofit membership organization protecting, restoring, and conserving Maine's environment now and for future generations. For more than 63 years, NRCM has helped protect the way of life that make Maine such a special place to live, work, and play. NRCM harnesses the power of the law, science, and the voices of more than 25,000 members and supporters in Maine and far beyond. We have a staff of 26, and our office is located in Augusta, just steps from the State House, where we do much of our work. Before I turn it over to Porter, just a couple of reminders about this Zoom webinar platform we're using tonight. First, this program is being recorded, and you'll receive a Zoom recording link to share with your friends and family. We hope that you'll share this program with them for folks who couldn't join us. Your video and your audio is disabled this evening by design. You'll only be able to see and hear Porter and I this evening. But if you have a question for Porter during the presentation, please type that question in the Q&A box, which you can find on the lower ribbon of your Zoom screen. And we'll have plenty of time for questions after Porter's presentation. So without further ado, I will turn it over to you, Porter. Take it away.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Todd. And really thanks for all the support over the years. It's been, I remember back at that first press conference we had for my first book, Deep, and really kind of trying to ring the alarm that winter is sort of shrinking, and that there are, first of all, a lot of jobs and ski areas and big parts of the Maine economy at stake with all the winter tourism that happens there, but also some tremendous ecological fallout from that, and a kind of a cascading line of natural disasters even around the world that are related to the loss of ice and snow, and again, winter shrinking at both ends in the fall and in the spring. So we're going to structure this pretty loosely. We have a slideshow here to kick off with, shot from the making of the book. I'll just give you a quick idea of where we're going to go here. I started reporting the book in the North Cascades out in Washington after reading a few studies that were really alarming about how a lack of snowpack in Western mountain regions was becoming one of, if not the primary reason for the spike in wildfires out there. These great snowscapes in the West are kind of a watering hose for the forests and farmland and whatnot. And as that snowpack goes down and disappears in the really dry seasons in middle of summer, even early spring, that runoff just wasn't there and wasn't feeding these forests, which kind of turns them into a tinderbox, and was creating a scenario where a lot of the biggest fires in the West were starting in regions that were traditionally covered by snow, pretty deep into the spring. So I went over out there to check that out, talk to scientists, walk through miles and miles of burned forests, which is something I had never done before. It's pretty terrifying and wild. And then just started following the thread of the story. I didn't have a plan at first. I just kind of wanted to see where the science kind of led. And the next spot was up in Juneau, Alaska. And my guide there was none other than Seth Campbell from University of Maine and the Juneau Icefield Research Program. And Seth is an amazing scientist, researcher, just has done so much to get scientists out on the ice, drilling ice cores, studying glaciers, measuring mass balance, glacial mass balance, and really resurrecting this historic polar research station up in Juneau. Second oldest, I think, in the world, started in the late 40s. And they every summer take a group of students and march them across the Juneau ice field, which takes I think around 2 months, month and a half, 2 months, something like that. And all along the way, there are these camps that have been built up over the years where they can do field studies, and faculty flies in. And of course, they're bringing in these crazy spectrometer cameras to photograph bacteria life living in the snowpack. And MIT sends a crew out to try to test fly these drones that can measure glacial mass balance with onboard radar and whatnot. Some really pretty cutting edge stuff, which is terrific. So we got to see that. And that led to back to one of my old haunts, the European Alps, which are warming at 2 to 3 times the rate of the average global warming rate. They're about 2 to 3 times more than that, and have already seen half of the ice in the Alps, half the glacial ice disappear. Likely the rest of it, most of the rest of it will be gone by the end of the century. And along with that, most of their snowfall, about 70% less snowfall across the region. So I really wanted to get in with that and talk about both the beginning of winter culture, sort of what drew people up into the mountains and up into the snowy and icy regions, and the beginning of time, how that all happened. And then, of course, how our winter culture that we celebrate today, from Christmas to, say, Easter or so, how that all kind of came to be. Skiing, ice skating, and sledding, and outdoor, the frost fairs on the Thames River back in the 1600s. And so I wrote about that there. And the final trip was to the Great North, up to Greenland, in the Arctic Circle. And there, of course, I was really talking about sea level rise and melting ice caps, and really the massive regions of ice in the Arctic and Antarctica, and the Tibetan Plateau and the Himalayas, and there in Greenland, and just how much water is running into the sea, raising sea levels at an unprecedented rate. And of course, in the Himalayas, that a lot of that ice it represents the primary source of fresh water for probably around 1 billion people around the world. Snow and ice represent the primary source of fresh water for 2 billion people, 60 million of which are just west of the Rockies. The United States is very much in the crosshairs of this. So I'll jump over to the slides now as we kind of cruise along here. There's a shot of the Northern Lights. And the trip this is in Greenland. The trip there was on dog sleds, and we went with 3 dozen Greenlandic Huskies and 3 guides / seal hunters, and had a really cold and a really beautiful trip. We got pretty good weather after the first day. The first day was absolutely horrendous. Probably a 40-mile-an-hour headwind. Temperature was around 0. The wind chill was off the charts. If anybody skied Sugarloaf, where I grew up skiing, it was like sitting on the spillway chair in a January afternoon with 40-mile-an-hour winds. So Todd, you can just do the slide every 10 seconds or 15 seconds or so, and I'll just kind of touch on some of them and
Yeah,
And
I was just gonna interrupt very quickly, Porter. I just had to make a quick change to the slideshow. It's advancing automatically every couple
oh,
seconds. So just bear with me for 1 second. I'll be
yeah,
right
that's
back.
cool. I can keep talking. So yeah, so Greenland was the final stop, and there I really started my first book, Deep, and my reporting for Powder in the New York Times. I really wrote a lot about the ski industry and how the ski industry is on the ropes because of this coming end of winter. I wrote spoke a lot about Maine, in fact, and the $320 million ski industry there that sees, in a down year, you're looking at, there's been several studies done about whether, how bad it is in a low snow year. And you're looking at losing upwards of $20-30 million to economic value added to the economy, 14,000 to 14,000 jobs or so. It really hits hard, and that's just at the ski area. And excuse me, that's actually winter tourism as a whole. So it includes snowmobiling, which is huge there. But if you look down the kind of chain, all of the feeder businesses, the delis and ski shops and hotels and restaurants and everything kind of leading up to the mountains really takes a huge hit as well. So I wrote a lot about that early on. In this book, I took it to a completely different level in that I started talking about these global and learning about these global feedbacks and ramifications that were like the drinking water thing that I was just mentioning. I was totally unaware of that. Learning that the albedo, the reflection of snow and ice, sends 80% of the solar radiation that hits it right back into space, just like a tinfoil reflector. And about a third of the planet is draped in snow and ice in the middle of winter. And it's a tremendous amount of heat that is just reflected back into space. And when that snowpack diminishes, when winter shrinks and comes later and ends earlier, it's revealing this dark earth and dark ocean water that absorb all of that light, all of that heat, and really increases the rate of warming. So here we're looking at skiing in the Dolomites. You can see the barbed wire on the left, which is left over from World War II. That was World War I. And that was a really big kind of fighting ground in the front between, at the time, Austria and Italy. And Italy kind of annexed that whole section, the Ladin valleys and that part of the Dolomites after the war. Again, Todd, you can just keep them going like every, 10, 14 seconds or so. This is also in the Dolomites, Giulio Monego skiing down. You can see that all that rock is actually was sub seafloor stone. There's mollusks and fish bones all fossilized in it. It's a really interesting, unique mountain range that's only, it's about a 2-hour, hour and a half drive north of Venice. So it's radically, the topography is pretty wild. You go up very quickly. This is one of the oldest hotels in the region that started this winter tourism business in Italy. In France and Switzerland, it had started probably 40 years before, but in the 1940s, La Perla here and the owner built this place into a barn with money he made as a ski instructor, and just started taking in people from all over the world and really helped this whole Corvara, Cortina, where the next Winter Olympics will be, is part of this area. And it was really cool to talk to him about the old days. That's an old gun from World War I up at the top of one of the passes there in the Dolomites. Something I write about in this section here was how a lot of the old timers in the Alps are really not believers in climate change, and it's not because they're crusty old guys and gals. It's really because they have seen so much glacial activity in the Alps, and they have been inhabited for so long that their families go back sometimes 10, 14 generations. And in that time, they've seen glaciers grow and recede. They have, seen houses knocked over. They back in the 1600s, they would chase back the glaciers with a bishop and holy water. They'd spray it on the tongue of the glacier. And I was explaining recently how they have a system of laws there that govern who owns land that is revealed by a glacier as it recedes, and who is responsible for damage caused by a glacier coming forward and knocking over a barn or a house or whatever. It's so commonplace there that when you say to one of them now, well, this is global warming, that's why the glaciers are receding. A lot of the old timers say, yeah, we've seen this before. It comes, it goes, it comes, it goes. But unfortunately,
We just lost your audio, Porter.
there we go.
Yep, you're back.
Am I back?
Yep, you're back.
Look at that. My AirPods stole my voice again. That happens like 5 times a day to me. The magic of Bluetooth. So at any rate, yeah, that was an interesting conversation. This here too is in the Dolomites. It was insanely windy when we were there. It was hurricane force wind when we started. All the lifts closed, all the resorts closed. We were on a backcountry lift assisted kind of hybrid tour for about 5 days. And as everyone was flocking to the lifts to go down, our guide was putting on his skins and starting to use these climbing skins to go up the trail. And so we put on our skins and we just followed him, and it was blowing probably 40 to 50 miles an hour that day. Not super dangerous where we were, but like really blowing you over at the top of the hill. And by the time we got to the first refugio that day, I think they were getting gusts over 100 miles an hour, maybe up to 115 miles an hour. And there was some real damage from that, luckily not where we were. But you can see the wind here. And a lot of this is, the windstorms they have been getting in the southern, these sort of like katabatic winds that they're getting in the southern Alps are very likely tangentially related to climate change and the Mediterranean warming up significantly. We drove by a whole forest going from one part of the Dolomites to another. It's probably, I don't know, maybe we could see 200 acres, maybe 300 acres on the side of this mountain. And all of these trees had been blown perfectly flat, just like someone took their hand and just matted them down. And these were big trees. I mean, I write in the book, I think this was in the book, maybe it got edited out, but it was one of the forests where Stradivarius harvested trees to make his violins. And I was reading about this, just like kind of trying to figure out if this had happened frequently or whatever. And it had not happened frequently, but there was a climate event when Stradivarius was making those violins, a really cold, not the little ice age, but, around there, around that time. And it was cold for, I don't know, 20 years or so, like abnormally cold. And so you get very small growth rings on the trees, which makes the trees very dense, which a lab in New York City basically put one of these violins into through like a CAT scan, and just saw like the density of the wood in those violins is what makes them resonate, sound the way that they do, and why it has been no one's been able to do it since. It's impossible to kind of match that tone. And it was very likely a climate event that created the trees that created the lumber that made those. So interesting side fact. You can see the wind here again. I mean, it was, if you dropped your skins or a pack, it was just gone. It was so crazy. And it was a little like Armageddon as well, thinking that, okay, if you're looking at current forecasts, the way that, under this high emission scenario, it's likely that half the ski resorts in the Northeast will close in the next 20 years or so. That's not saying they won't have any snow, but they won't have enough to keep a profitable season up. And it would be too expensive or too warm to make snow. Europe is in pretty much the same scenario. although they have way more resorts. And they do have a lot of low elevation resorts in Austria, especially, that are going quite quickly. But when we were up there with no one around, it was kind of weird to think that this could be the norm. Backcountry skiing could be in a lot of old resorts that anyone who's like really into skiing in New England probably follows the New England Lost Ski Areas project. And we used to go and ski those hills a lot, the little mont pas closed hills in New England, and that could easily happen in the Alps as well. Here we're in Juneau, and this is the second part of the trip. We're coming into Camp 18, just following up these rivers of ice. We started over the Mendenhall Glacier, got into the Gilkey Glacier. I'm pretty sure we flew over the Taku Glacier. They were just everywhere, and obviously on the ice field, it is spawning all of these glaciers. The divide of the Juneau ice field is the highest elevation point, and from there it kind of spreads out. And they looked so much like rivers. You'd see them go around an entire mountain, and there would be a little swirling eddy of ice in the corner, and faster and larger ripples on the outside where you could tell it was moving a lot faster. Here in the ice field, they're looking at, I can't remember the statistic exactly, but around 60% of it is very much in danger and on the way to disappearing, and by the 2080s or so. Hard to believe when you're there, seeing this. That's the tongue of the Mendenhall right there, coming down into Mendenhall Lake. But that used to go completely across that lake. That glacier was extremely healthy down to the bottom, and now the terminus is just moving uphill so fast that Seth was working with the National Forest Service, advising them they want to build a new viewing platform to see the glacier. And just like in Chamonix and every other touristic glacial zone, they're moving their viewing platforms uphill and uphill and uphill. And Chamonix has built 3 chairlifts now to either get up to the tongue of the glacier or get down from the tongue of the glacier to get back to town for skiers who are skiing the Valley Blanche down to the Mer de Glace. This is a very cute seal that was on our trip. Came back from our trip after the seal hunters got him. It's their way of life. It is how they've existed for many for several thousands of years. And but still, it was hard seeing a seal get caught. I was tasked with holding said seal on the back of the dog sled for the last 3 hours of the trip. So we had this very sort of dark and intimate relationship spawn between the two of us. But at any rate, it was still very, very cool to see their, not to see their lifestyle, to actually sort of live it for 5 days out in the remote east coast of Greenland, where we started in Kulusuk and went kind of up the coast across bays and inlets and fjords. Beautiful country. Very apparently in the summer, it's actually quite verdant and green, and waterfalls and salmon fishing and great fly fishing in the rivers and whatnot. It's just a really terrific spot. But as warming hits up there, which the farther north you go, the faster it's happening. Arctic amplification is a real thing. And this staff that Eustace has here, it's a wooden staff with a sharp metal tip on the end. You can see he's got a .22 rifle with a scope at his feet. That's the backup way that they hunt seals, but they prefer to hunt them by using that staff to chip a hole in the ice, create a fake breathing hole, and then snare them in sort of like a gill net. But at any rate, the issue there is that whole bay that he's standing on had been open water about 3 weeks before. And when it's open water, they can't get anywhere on their sleds. You can't really get anywhere. You can't use a boat because there's too much ice. You can't use a sled because there's too much water. And so they're hunting and fishing kind of subsistence living is really taken a serious hit as the coastal shore-fast ice disappears, and it's disappearing quite quickly. We got into some pretty hard ice and cold winter after a slow start on the second day. And here's the three teams cruising ahead, a couple other passengers in the bright orange or bright yellow jacket on the left there, you can see. They use a fan formation instead of the 2x2s like they use in Alaska. And the fan formation is it's really crazy. I want to say it's efficient, but man, they're just constantly getting tangled up with each other. So I keep pointing as if you can see where I'm pointing, but follow those green lines back and you can see them getting all tangled up. And they have this ingenious knot called the larkspur that is a slip knot, a cinch. It's basically a cinch knot where you can pull the tangle through, cinch it, and all the tethers are then pulling on the knot, which is pulling on the sled, and it leaves all the tangled tethers kind of slack. And then for, oh my God, an hour or so underway, our driver would just be pulling the leads apart. And it was kind of dizzying to watch, but I think they liked it because it helped pass the time. So at any rate, that was day 2. Day 4, we got a text message through a satellite messenger that the president had closed the borders of the United States because of the coronavirus. And at that time, no one was allowed in. Thankfully, about 12 hours later, they clarified that American citizens could get home. But that was a tough 12 hours when we were out in the Arctic Circle and everyone decided it was time to turn around and go back. So in one very long day, we made it back to the base camp. And a couple of days later, managed to get on the literal last flight out of Greenland back to our various homes. So that was kind of stressful. This is one of the burned forests here. That's Mount Adams in the background. And this is a really interesting walk. You can see all of the cut deadwood there along the side of the road. They cut as much as they can near hiking trails and roads so it doesn't fall on people. But I think what a lot of people don't totally get about a forest fire is that, after a forest fire, it doesn't just go away. Things stay like this for decades. The new growth will come and it'll green up around the foot of these trees, but the dead trees are there and they're falling down and hanging up on each other and super dangerous and kind of depressing to look at. So we walked through this forest, which had been not burned once, not twice, but had triple burned in the course of around, I don't know, was it 15 years or so? I write about it in the book. And in sort of statistically in that region, it typically would have taken maybe around 200 years for that area to see 3 burns. And it had seen them in such a short amount of time. And the culprit was this low snowpack. There was no water to feed the forest. So a lightning strike in the spring, a lot of these get sparked by lightning strikes. It's really it's sparking in a tinderbox. That's a great shot right there of that fire goes through so fast it doesn't even burn all the trees. It just a lot of times is up in the canopy. Racing along, you'll see a practically live trunk and then singed from 10 feet and up. So at any rate, without that snowpack there, just slowly acting as this water storage unit, releasing its water slowly into the forest. They're a real tinderbox. And what this crew was doing was they had remote study sites with hydrometers and weather stations and these kind of amazing sensors that you dig underground that follow the path of water. They follow it from the air, so they can rate sort of barometric pressure and the rainfall rate and amount, and then they can measure moisture in the soil. And then with the video camera that they have there through stills and video, they can also measure like what is greening up, like how much vegetation is being fed by this water. And then of course, if a fire starts or whatnot, or they can measure the dry out before the fire starts. So it's pretty cool to see them in action doing this. And like most scientific scenes, like on site, it's not fancy. It's really hard. A lot of physical labor and a lot of homemade gadgets kind of hanging off the trees and whatnot. But they've done terrific work and really have been cited as some of the leading scientists in that cryosphere world. This is Methil Valley, Washington Pass and Methil Valley that I write about quite a bit in the beginning. And it's part in the beginning of the book. It was a real revelation to see this lookout here and see these just unbelievable relief of these mountains, some of the steepest in the country. And there are glaciers here. They're disappearing quite quickly. I got to spend an afternoon with a local legend, Dr. John Rydell, who really started measuring mass balance glaciers in the North Cascades, was the first, and his program has since been copied in other national parks once people realized that these baseline measurements were so important for modeling what's going to happen next, what's going to happen to the water supply in Seattle, what's going to happen to the forests and all of this water that snow and ice were providing to them. He started that, and really this was his backyard for, oh my gosh, a very long time. He just retired last year, so I hope he's enjoying a little skiing now. This is the thermometer at Kim Maltese's house that burned. He's the first probably 20 pages of the book follow his ordeal. And, here's a rancher, third generation Westerner, lifetime skier, passionate skier at a little local town, Run Hill. And he sort of saw it from both sides. He'd been a firefighter fighting wildfires for most of his life. And this fire came and took out his home, everything he had, left him homeless for a while till he fixed up his parents' place. And again, the fires in Washington, a majority of them are the result of this lack of spring snowpack and the real slow drying out of the West, which is getting to the point of practically desertification, the kind of morphing into a more desert ecology and landscape. This is back in the Dolomites, looking at the windstorm, and where we're standing is just flat valley floor, not even that cold, at that time. And then the relief just goes up. I mean, it goes up 5,000 feet right in front of your eyes. It's totally stunning. Here's some historical shots from the Dolomites. And I'm just, I'm kind of wondering, Todd, we're at 6:37. Maybe we should open it up to some questions. You tell me what you think. I know I've seen a bunch come up in the chat, and I'd love to answer a few if there are any.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks very much, Porter. We have plenty of time for questions. So if folks have questions for Porter, if you've read the book, if you have any questions for the author, if you've read any of his past books, have any questions about those, and I'm sure Porter would be happy to entertain them. Got a couple of questions here in the chat. We'll start with one from Heidi. Question is, were those Dolomite trees blown over anything like the trees at Mount St. Helen after the 1980s eruption? Maybe just talk a little bit about the burned trees that you saw. I don't think they were in the Dolomites, but
those burned trees. Well, in the Dolomites were the trees that were laid over by the windstorm. I'd never seen anything like that, and it was really freaky to see, just on top of houses, on top of the road. The ones that were in the most recent pictures were, it's funny you asked that, because I know that John Rydell's first vision when he drove out to take his internship in the North Cascades, Mount St. Helens blew while he was practically driving by. It was maybe a couple days before he got there. And he was trying to get, he's a geologist, of course, wants to get in and see what's happening. So I didn't actually, I don't really know what that landscape looked like, but I could imagine that if the trees weren't just completely incinerated and gone, it would look pretty similar. They're just these like obelisks of char and it's incredibly dangerous. I mean, especially in the windstorm that we were in, these things were creaking and creaking. I write about in the book this one tree that was probably at this angle or so, and the trunk here was about 70% fractured, and it was just barely hanging in there. And the scientist, it was kind of a tough woman. She was like, "Don't worry about that. It's been like that for 2 years." I was like, "All right." I wasn't standing in front of it for sure. And she wrote me a few months later and she was like, "Oh, by the way, that tree came down." It was right next to where her site was. So I was like, "All right, let's not get too confident out here." So yeah, probably a similar look, but obviously totally different cause.
Porter, you mentioned that you connected with UMaine professor and researcher Seth Campbell. Was that right?
Yep.
Yeah, Dr. Campbell.
Yeah,
we actually hosted him for an NRCM webinar about a year ago, actually in connection with Protect Our Winters. We collaborated. Can you just say a little bit more about how you met Dr. Campbell and how you connected to his research out in Alaska?
Dr. Campbell is great friends and climbing partners with one of my best friends from high school. I went to MDI High School, grew up in Southwest Harbor, and he, I guess my friend started the Acadia Climbing School way back when, different owners now, and Seth worked for him as a guide. And the two of them climbed all over the place, and they still, I'm sure they were out ice climbing this morning. They're climbing all the time. So at any rate, my friend said, "Hey, you're writing this book about the cryosphere. You got to talk to my buddy Seth." And Seth and I just instantly hit it off. And this was in July. I was talking to him in June. And I think it was July when I was on a plane to Juneau and sitting shotgun in a helicopter with him, going out to Camp 18 to see all the incredible work that they're doing out there. This guy is a legend. He's like a rising star for sure. When I'm in, 12 different countries talking to scientists at different research labs, and everyone knows Seth Campbell, and it's pretty impressive. He's a terrific coordinator.
Awesome. So this next question comes from Wendy. Question is, are there any known anomalous areas where polar winds, ocean currents, et cetera, have resisted general global warming and climate change? Are there any kind of places in the world where, it's just not evident that climate change is happening?
Absolutely. Over the last 30 years, as every glacier in the world pretty much is receding, there were glaciers that were growing. Right now, there are some glaciers in Antarctica that are growing, while others are rapidly receding or being undercut by ocean currents. The climate system is unbelievably complicated. It does things that don't make any sense. I was interviewing someone at the NOAA lab in Princeton, New Jersey, just a couple days ago, who was telling me about this freakish phenomenon that when a typhoon forms in a certain part of the Western Pacific, north of Japan, every single time Antarctica will drop by about 2 degrees Celsius. That's a very far way away. You're talking practically North Pole and South Pole. But they see that. And the folks up at in Juneau who study that were telling me about other crazy, anomalous events that happen like every single time. One that people have known about for a long time is when Siberia is covered with snow, when they have a big winter, California has sunny skies, a certain type of weather pattern, a certain type of precipitation event happens every single time. It's like very much tied together. That's sort of because of the albedo of that snow creating a high pressure bubble that now the jet stream has to move around. But it's not really like knocking over dominoes. It's like dropping the whole box of dominoes on the floor and they go like this. They're trying to get a handle on what causes what. And that's what these climate models that you keep hearing about, these massive supercomputer simulations of Earth's climate system, that's what they're trying to figure out. And they truly have not figured it out. What they know is that we are incrementally getting warmer and warmer, faster and faster. But throughout that warming, you will see cooling events. One example that you probably read about in the Times, Henry Fountain's terrific reporting, is and this is what I was in Greenland writing about, is as the Greenland ice sheet melts into the water, that is a tremendous influx of fresh water. Fresh water floats on top of salt water, and it is slowing and eventually could completely block the Gulf Stream. If that happens, the Gulf Stream is what keeps Northern Europe artificially warm. You could see up to a 10-degree drop in temperature in Europe and another mini ice age take hold for maybe up to 1,000 years. When you think of 10 degrees, don't think about what that feels like on your skin. The whole little ice age that happened 1500s, 1600s, 1700s, that was, across the continent, Europeans lost about an inch of average height. They were malnourished to the point that the average person was actually getting shorter. There were an incredible number of conflicts, of wars. Several countries lost about half their population to starvation and violence. That was about a degree to 1.5 degrees Celsius of change that really sparked a lot of that conflict and kind of catastrophe. So what you can see is right now, parts of Antarctica glaciers are growing. You also will see more snow coming in snowstorms. So you're likely going to see fewer winter storms, but each winter storm will carry a lot more snow. For each degree that the atmosphere warms, it can hold a bit more water, a fair amount. I can't remember the percentage, exactly 8% or something like that. And warmer air just holds more moisture. And when you have more moisture in the system, you're going to get more snow. And when you add more heat to the system, you are going to get more storms. You're going to get more ferocious hurricanes, typhoons, cyclones, things like that. So we could have some very epic winters on our way to having the last winter. In fact, that's probably what will happen. Winter shrinks. Each storm is a bit more intense, but spring is coming earlier, fall is reaching later.
So there's an appropriate question in the Q&A box. And again, if folks have questions for Porter, don't be shy. You can welcome to type your question in the Q&A box. We've got about 10 minutes left for questions. This next question gets to the point of how you stay so upbeat and cheery when writing about climate change and some of the devastation that we're seeing around the world. How do you stay so upbeat as a writer and especially as a skier, in the face of so much devastation of climate change and, the loss of snowpack? How do you stay upbeat and optimistic?
I just ignore it like everyone else. It's too much. It's too much to carry around. I've got a young daughter and I can't sort of bear to think about what's going to happen on our current track. What I believe is that we're not going to continue our current track. I believe that we will get to a point, and we are getting to a point now where a vast majority of Americans want action on climate change. They want renewable energy. They want to stop the disaster that is kind of unfolding in other parts of the world. We're not seeing, well, we are seeing it in the United States, but the United States is a bit more resilient to that. You're seeing these bigger hurricanes, coming every year. You're seeing this epic rainfall in New York City. I live just north of New York and lived in New York for 20 years. I mean, they're breaking rainfall records every year or two, that's just holding that much more moisture. You're seeing these freak hurricanes intensify so quickly and so much right before they hit land. There's a connection to tornadoes, there's a connection to the wildfires, there's a connection to sea level rise. So we're not completely inured to it, but if you look at the tropical storm, not even a hurricane, that just hit Mozambique and Madagascar, there's 120,000 people without houses. There was around 80 to 100 so far that have passed away because of the storm, but the number of villages and homes and just complete devastation, because there is no resiliency there. So it's happening quite quickly, and it's very hard to think about. It's very hard to stay upbeat. When I first started reporting on this, I won't lie, I had nightmares for a month. It was really deep-seated and terrifying. But I don't think any of us are the kind of people that are just going to sit back and be like, this is too scary to deal with. An analogy I point out is like some guy holds you up in a dark alley with a knife. You're not going to be like, you're like too much of a bummer to deal with right now, so I'm just gonna go. That's not gonna go well in climate change or in the alley.
Porter, can you just tell us maybe a day that you had in your travels that it was one of the most memorable moments? Maybe a day you had a lot of fun, skiing in the Dolomites, or a day that you really remember from traveling and writing this book. Maybe it was adventuring with friends. What's one day that really kind of stuck out as a real pure adventure?
I think it would have been I think the first one would be at the Juneau Ice Field, Camp 18, when we landed. And when we were flying over these glaciers, I've skied glaciers, I've seen glaciers, but I've never really seen an ice field, and all of these glaciers just draping and moving, groaning and cracking. And I mean, it was otherworldly. It was inspiring. It was just like, if you could look at the last million years and super fast forward, you would see these glaciers flowing like rivers. You would see them flowing down into the valley and knocking over mountains and pushing till, across the Midwest of North America. And then you'd see them retract just as fast, and this green come up and the forest come up, and then the glaciers come again and gouge out the Great Lakes. And like, you really see it up there. You see this geological time in action. And I had never seen that before. And that was just absolutely stunning to me. Each place in Greenland, the first night that we arrived at, when we were on the trip, like up in the backcountry, everyone was in the tent warming up. And I just like, I had to get up this mountain and see the view. And it was sunset, and I scrambled up. In the book, I write about how the guide gave me a pack of flares and was like, you're probably not going to see a bear, but if you do, like, just this is how these things work, just pop off the end and like shoot it at the bear. And I look at the pack, and there's a pack of 5, and 3 of them are missing. Like they use these things quite frequently. So that was kind of disturbing. But from that vantage point, I did get up the ridge, and man, I just saw a landscape. I just never seen anything like this. I mean, you're talking like, 800-foot icebergs over here, 10,000-foot rocky peaks over here, this frozen bay in between, that gorgeous Arctic light, that kind of blue hue to it. I mean, that was really, those 2 scenes are probably my favorite.
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing that. I don't think you traveled to Russia in the book, but there's a question here about the melting permafrost in northern Russia and its effect on the world's climate. I know that melting permafrost is also a big issue in Alaska and other parts of the world, boreal Canada. Can you maybe just speak a little bit about the threat of melting permafrost and releasing methane and that big threat to drive climate change as well?
Yeah, that was going to be the fifth part of the book. Those flights were booked. I was going to the permafrost lab in northern Siberia. I can't pronounce the name of the city, but it's a big one. And the pandemic hit. And so I barely got home. I barely got to Greenland. It hadn't hit New York yet. It hit New York while I was in Greenland. And by the time I got back, just everything, as we all know, it just shut down. All the flights shut down, countries shut down. And so I had enough at that point, or my editor and I had a long discussion and realized like, this was going to be 350 pages. Like we're good. Like this is going to be a little over the top if we try to get Siberia in here. So I had done a lot of research on that at that point. I mean, this is one of these tipping points that I just wish people would comprehend that it's not that, complicated. There's 9 million square miles of frozen permafrost, mostly in Arctic Canada and Siberia. In that permafrost, these were swamplands. These were back in millions of years ago during the hothouse Earth era. There were like giant beavers and camels and like horses walking around the Arctic. And so these swamplands are frozen, covered by many, many, many feet of snow and ice. And as it thaws, all of the methane, CO2, billions of tons of greenhouse gases that you can imagine are in like a peat moss bog are starting to thaw. And they could release all of those greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, warming the planet many times more than we ever did. And there's no way to stop it. Once the thaw happens, that insulating effect is going to spike the warming rate so fast that it's going to thaw more. And then that is going to increase the rate more. And this is the nightmare scenario that we're trying to avoid. So we're trying to keep the Greenland ice sheet from slipping into the ocean and raising sea levels by 20 feet. We're trying to stop the permafrost from thawing and really just taking climate change out of our hands completely. This thing that we very much engineered and did to ourselves, we will not have control over it anymore after these tipping points. So that's what they're studying in Russia. It's melting incredibly fast there, where they're pulling out saber-toothed tiger corpses and woolly mammoth tusks and whatnot out of the earth, and huge sections of, if you imagine kind of like bubbly, steamy permafrost frozen, as it thaws, it collapses. And so you get what looks like an open pit mine just one day, like boom, 1,000 acres of land just like vanished into a hole. So it is a real problem. It's kind of shocking that, Russia's government doesn't seem too concerned about it. Our government is concerned about it, but not quite enough of our other legislators are concerned about it. And it is end times kind of stuff. So we got to do whatever we can to make sure that does not happen.
Absolutely. We'll get you out on this last question, Porter. Obviously, you're from Maine. You grew up, you mentioned, in Southwest Harbor. Maybe just say a little bit about kind of growing up in Maine, and if you learned about climate change as a kid, or how you got into skiing in Maine. Maybe just talk about kind of your Maine roots and how growing up in Maine kind of set you on a trajectory that you're on now.
First of all, Maine's the best state in the nation. Everybody knows it. I live in New York. I still just constantly pine for Maine. Pardon the pun. I grew up there. I mean, we moved there when I was 3, and I definitely remember extremely cold winters, a lot of below zero weather. I remember skating, Thanksgiving. I remember skiing. well before then. Gosh, I remember when Killington would open slopes in September because their snowmaking capacity was such, but it was cold enough to do that. That's done in, you know, Killington, Vermont, but it was just magical. I didn't really, I'll be honest, I didn't like winter too much at first as a little kid. Like my daughter is the same age now that I was when I moved to Maine, and she's coming around to it. We had a great sledding session the other day, but you know, a lot of times you get cold and it's uncomfortable. But over the years, when we started backcountry skiing and going to Sugarloaf every weekend and, you know, working odd jobs to be able to buy our passes, and, you know, it became an obsession and a lifestyle. And now my pals, Seth and my mutual friend, does wilderness skating on lakes all around Maine with those big 18-inch Norwegian freeheel skates. And I'm cross country skiing here like every other day. We've got an alpine ski resort about 15 minutes from our house that we go to a couple times a week. Pond hockey, you know, it just, you know, in older life, we start to really appreciate the things that we had as a kid. And I just remember bonfires on Echo Lake and the winter carnival at Long Pond that was both terrifying and super exciting. I think I put in the book that one of the rides was the inner tube drag, where they just tied, I don't know, half a dozen inner tubes together to a rope and then to the back of like an F-250, and the guy would just drive around the lake in circles and try to flip the kids off. It was fast and a little dangerous, actually. But that was, you know, that's Maine, fast and dangerous.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, Porter, we really appreciate you joining us tonight and sharing stories from your new book with us, The Last Winter. The last thing that I'll close on is, you know, of course, NRCM is a policy and an advocacy shop, and we couldn't have an NRCM webinar without letting folks know how they could take action against climate change and to invest in renewable energy here in Maine. So I'm going to drop a link here in the chat for everybody. So NRCM, in coalition with some of our partners, are working to pass a bill through the Maine legislature this session. It's LD 1350, and it would direct the Public Utilities Commission to double the rate of renewable energy that we're procuring, particularly solar and wind. This bill could quickly speed up Maine's transition to renewable energy and help us meet the goals outlined by the Mills administration to power Maine with clean renewable energy. So this is the biggest clean energy bill that we're working to pass this legislative session. The Energy Utilities and Technology Committee is going to consider it sometime in the next couple of weeks, and we're hoping that it will pass so we can see more solar, more wind, more clean renewable energy here in Maine. So read the fact sheet, please call your lawmakers about that bill, and we hope to get it passed this session. But again, Porter, thanks very much for joining us tonight and for sharing your book with us. We really appreciate your time.
Thanks so much, Todd. I appreciate it.
All right, Porter. Thanks, everyone. Have a nice night. Stay warm out there.